And what is the defect detection rate? Like if you're running test automation every now and then, like how many defects your automation framework really detecting? And what is the time taken from commencement to completion? I'm sure there's a lot of effort estimation that goes in, but then are you sticking to those estimates? And how much is the test coverage? And then how's your test automation visibility or traceability for that matter? So I'm sure these are some hard questions that I'm asking. They sound very simple, but then the answer is quite a complicated one. But then these are very basic questions that I would like to ask you, and then I want you to ask yourself or within your organization, how do we handle these questions? So try to answer these as much as I can, but then again, each one has its own implication. And I'm sure each one of the answers or response, you'll have your own takeaways with that. And I'm happy to have your, response to those comments. Okay, so I'll start with the very basic. Okay, and there's a reason why I'm trying to put this through from the basics, because ROI is all. It's a very, very basic thing. So I will start with the basics of test automation. So what is test automation? It is the use of a software to control the execution of tests, the comparison of actual outcomes to the predicted outcomes, the setting up of test preconditions and other test control and test reporting functions. Okay, so this is very concise. This is the very basic test automation definition that you'll come across. You search on the web, this is what it is. And there's a second rider to that. So commonly the test automation involves automating a manual process that is already in place that uses a formalized testing process. So every word in these statements is very calculated. And if we try to deviate from any of those words, we'll be in big trouble. Okay. So why we are sticking to the basics, we'll eventually find out. So I'll be covering a few aspects of what the automation ROI is, how we can improve it, and then who are the key players. So let's start with the what. Okay, what is test automation ROI? What is it all about? And as we talk, you please feel free to just put a comment in the chat box. We can take up the question or the comment later on. We can have a discussion. So I want this to be as open as it can be, because this is a community discussion. And then I don't want it to be me being a trainer, you being the trainee. So it's a back and forth thing, so that it's a learning experience for everyone. Okay, so what is test automation ROI all about? So conventionally, if you really have to talk about, it's all about money, isn't it? It's all about money. So the companies spend on test automation because they see, money being saved or money being coming in or whatever the money mechanisms that we have. So is it all really about money? I put a question mark like very intentionally. Is it really about money? Most of the big guys would like to think about, but then whether it's really about money or not, we'll eventually find out. So if it is about money, so this is something that we usually, any automation architect or automation tester or automation proponent, we try to advertise automation on these lines. And I have done this in beginning of my career, when automation was not that popular and manual testing was all over the place. I had to convince the top management, everybody to go for automated testing. So these were the few key points. And if you search online, I'm sure you'll find many more. So these are some basic ones. We say it is faster than manual testing. We can have more coverage. The results are reliable and the results are consistent. The tests are consistent. We save a lot of time and cost, and it improves the accuracy. And then we can have overnight execution. It increases the efficiency of the manual testers as well, so that they can focus on other areas. And we can have reusable test scripts, which can be used for multiple projects. And more the test execution cycles, the more benefit we get out of it. And then eventually early time to market. So these are the few high level, selling points that we tell our managers. But then thankfully, we don't have to do that anymore, because Melbourne market is quite mature enough to understand the value of test automation at this point of time. So we have shown these graphs as well, where we say over a period of time how the manual costs go up and the automation brings the cost down, even though the initial expenses for automated testing can be slightly higher. And if you see the second graph, there is a break-even point where the automated test initially has a higher cost, but then over a period of time, it pays you back. So that's your return on investment, basically. So that's at that point you get more return on investment. And then the last third graph is talking about the defect detection rate and how exactly we can identify more defects using test automation. So I would also like to highlight on certain facts of evolution of test automation. So these were the initial days when we had to really sell these ideas, but then not anymore. And now the present scenario is much more simpler. Companies usually know we need automation for testing. And Melbourne market is mature enough to understand all those things. So it is really nice. So we have to jump up to the next level of question. So how much will I spend on test automation? When I say I, it can be the organization or the test manager or a test lead, whoever is dealing with this thing. So it's not only about test automation, right? It's about anything for that matter. Even if I have to buy a television or if I have to buy something, a house, like I have to think of all of these things. So it's a very rudimentary question that we all have to answer this question for whatever we are dealing with. So because it's test automation, we have to think, okay, how much am I able to spend on planning? How much for development? How much for testing? How much for execution? Maintenance, retesting, report generation. And then, of course, once it is there in place, I have to train the other manual testers or automation testers or even the developers for that matters. And there can be handover sessions. And then how much time, money, and effort am I saving? So once we have spent we have calculated or estimated all of this, or even spent, how much am I saving? And then how much value addition am I doing? Am I contributing to the quality? And how much are we earning as a business? Everybody tends to talk about that, right? Like how much are we earning on top of this? So every other solution that we are probably seeing, be it cloud, be it AI, machine learning, everything is somehow, even test automation, like everything is driven in this direction. So any new technology that is coming up also has to answer these questions. So please note, each step in this list is a potential enabler for generating a higher ROI if done perfectly, okay? And it can hinder that also if gone wrong. If any of this step goes wrong, the return on investment will take a hit. Now, each step is a discussion in itself, okay? And then we don't have that much time. But I'll try to touch upon a few aspects of these topics, okay? Which needs to be kept in mind and which needs to be addressed so that we get a good return on investment. Now, how do you calculate ROI? Nobody answered me that, but then this is a very basic formula that we use. Basically, we calculate the time and effort required to plan, development, and test automated testing. plus the execution time multiplied by the number of times we executed. And then do the same thing with manual testing, and then you subtract the two, and that's the time that you are saving basically. And you can apply other factors as well. So I'll not dwell deep into these formula, because all it is saying is how many times I'm running a particular test and how much time I'm taking to create my manual script, or how much time I'm taking to build my automation framework, and then the maintenance cost. So whether there'll be a break-even point if I have to calculate these things. So this is a plain vanilla way of putting things about how the ROI, test automation ROI looks like. But is it that simple? If you search online for test automation ROI, this is the formula that they have, every other website is going to show you. But is it that simple? So another question that I can ask is, how do I estimate the effort in the first place? I know as experienced automation testers, maybe we can put certain estimates, but then how can I be so sure that it's going to be correct? And then if we are versing automated testing to manual testing, then what if the manual testing is obsolete? I'm sure there are a few organizations out there, there is no manual testing, it's all about automated testing. So how exactly are we going to calculate the return on investment then, right? So these are the few questions that we have to ask on this way of calculating ROI. Now, so because it is a plain vanilla way of expressing the formula for test automation ROI, we have to take into consideration a few more points. Okay. All the other test automation activities, the way it's talked about, it's only planning, development, testing, and execution. But I have here summarized all the list of other activities. This is not even exhaustive. This is very minimalistic steps that I have listed down here. What we do in planning phase, we estimate, we create POCs, and then we create a roadmap. We do resource planning. We do prioritize our tests. We select the test cases as automation candidates, and then we think about executing, or how do we monitor it? How do we review the plan? Review the requirements? How do we gather what's the scope of automation testing? Tool evaluation, feasibility analysis, and then how do we calculate the indicative ROI? How do we calculate the exact ROI? And what kind of framework do I need to pick up? How the solution will look like? What are the training requirements? How do I test the back end, front end, middleware? And when it comes to design, what kind of framework am I going to design? And how I'm going to handle a particular, say, exception? Am I going to integrate with something else? How would the rework and review happen? And from an execution point of view, who is going to execute? Is it going to be a manual execution, or is it going to be scheduled execution? Are we collecting any matrices, any statistics? What are the deliverables? How do we take care of continuous improvement? So these are various other basic questions that we need to ask. So ROI calculation can't be that simple. Okay, so it's much more complicated than that. So this picture kind of tries to summarize what all factors can impact the ROI. It's not only the development, testing, and the execution times versus the manual execution times, but then there's a lot more than that. What are the project timelines? How many resources do we have, and how much does it cost? How much time does it take to develop a feature, as in development point of view, not from a testing point of view? And if I've seen a few organizations where the manual, the automation testers were taking much more time than the developers themselves to test a particular feature. So is that a good return on investment? maybe not. And then how many test cycles, what are the maintenance cost, and what are the processes, what the application is like, what is the team like, what are the skills, what is the tools that we are using, how much is the money that is being spent on this particular activity. So there's much more than the simple vanilla version that we looked at. So what are the various things that we have to consider, especially? So these are the bigger points that I'm trying to showcase. So you have to think about, how do we plan, how much effort are we putting in planning, development, testing, execution, maintenance, rework, and documentation of the whole test automation solution, basically. What is the execution time? Of course, yes, we need to figure it out. Then how much time are we taking for environment setup, for configuring? I have had experiences where, like, switching from one environment to another environment would take, ages. So these are the few things which can, hinder our automation ROI. How is my test data set up? And then if I had to switch between environment, scenario, or say single execution to batch execution, how much switch I have to make, how much changes I have to make in my automation scenario. And then if I had to upskill someone, how much time will it take for a person to learn this whole new framework and start executing it? And what are the different types of testing? What are the levels of testing? How do we select a particular automation candidate for execution? So these are the various questions that we have to pick up, and then we have to decide whether a particular candidate needs to be automated. And then we have to think about the individual ROI. If that can be done manually faster than automating the whole thing, we have to take into those considerations. So now the few more design considerations. So that was from planning point of view. This is from design point of view. So especially if we are doing agile in sprint automation, how exactly are we going to, automate everything within a particular sprint? So how exactly data and functionality are separated? What kind of generation reports are we generating? The details about execution, if it requires certain intervention, manual intervention in between, which is not good. And how exactly are we going to implement the code? So these are a few factors that we have to think about. Then we have to think about few key hindrances, like feasibility, whether is it feasible to do test automation for a particular scenario, or come up with a solution with respect to the testing. And do we have enough domain or application knowledge? Are there possibility of scope creep? What is the initial investment looking like? How much is the test coverage that we are looking for? And then there can be serious script errors. And then the debugging itself can take huge amount of time. I've worked with a framework where debugging took me ages, much more than I didn't design that, but then yeah, that's my take on that. So there have been situations like that. And then sometimes the the design may not be very good. So it may be extremely complex, and the maintenance can be high. Maintenance of the code or test data for that matter. Now coming to the test automation maturity model. Now you have to, this is I'm sure like most of you would have come across this. So the automation framework that is created could be skill based. Like whoever is your automation tester, he or she is doing it based on whatever he or she knows. Or the solution could be made based on the tool that the organization has procured long time ago. And then they have shelled out a lot of money, so they want it to be working. It could be test based, like what tests need to be automated, and then we have to create a solution around that. Risk based, which are the risky areas? These areas are prone for manual testing errors or gaps or defects. So those areas need to be automated. It's not reliable on manual testing. Technique based, our keyword driven framework, data driven framework, all these things are technique based. Should we, some companies have AUT based on the application and the test, they'll design a particular framework. There can be few legacy frameworks. They're just there because they have been worked upon for years together, and then the company can't pay you to move away from those legacy automation frameworks. And then lastly, they are return on investment based. So where you want to see a return on the investment that you are spending on a particular automation framework. So this could be money based or some other requirement based framework. Now, these are a few automation stats, how they may look like in most of the companies. So if you look at the first graph, it's basically effort versus time, where over a period of time, the effort just increases on your automation testing. If you want to increase the coverage, the effort also increases. And so is the automation development cost. Over a period of time, it's just increasing. There's no drop in that anywhere. And I've seen like this is quite a common phenomena in the market, surprisingly. And then the maintenance cost is increasing over a period of time. It should decrease over a period of time, actually. The learning, if somebody is learning, say 1 month down the line, the learning curve may be small, but then the person comes again and then tries to do the same automation over a period of time, the learning takes more time. Okay. So learning curve is an ongoing thing. And then last but not the least is the execution time against the coverage. So if the coverage keeps on increasing, the execution time is increasing. So what's I personally, I would say these are few. I'm not sure if I'm seeing the considering only pessimistic scenarios here, but then somehow that's a bit of a reality in many organizations nowadays. But then we'll look at like how things can be improvised. So now, how do we cut down? How do we cut down these expenses, and then how exactly can we improve this test automation ROI? How can we cut down the time that we spend? How can we cut down the money, the effort? And then how can we come up with smart design and we can upskill team members accordingly? So to put it in a very simplistic way, look at the big picture. Have a futuristic view. Okay, so if you look at a problem at the grassroots level and don't see where it falls in the big picture, then we are just finding a solution for that particular moment. In next moment, in next day, next week, the problem statement may change, and then we are back to square one. So we have to have an understanding of how the system looks like, what exactly I want to do. So we have to have the big picture. We have to have a futuristic view in the sense that the solution that I'm creating today must be usable tomorrow. And the longer I see, the better it is. But then, fortunately or unfortunately, not many people out there have that kind of a vision. But then it's a good practice to develop such kind of a vision. Now, how do we increase the test automation ROI? As I said, each of the steps earlier that I had mentioned is a potential enabler for improving the test automation ROI. So when you do a framework design, you should have a vision, the big picture, the futuristic view. You should have the test data separated from the test script so that the test data can be maintained separately. Because set data can change frequently, while the test script shouldn't. And then you have to have a mechanism to switch between environments seamlessly, which can be quite a costly affair at times. And then how exactly you want to create the test scenarios. You need to take into consideration the execution cycles, the maintenance, like it shouldn't be extremely hard to maintain the whole framework. The learning curve should be small. Utilization, everybody in your team or in your organization should be able to use it. So the higher the utilization, the higher is going to be the return on investment. If you create a framework which only I understand and nobody else does, then I'm sure it will be trashed sooner or later. And the money that company has spent is going nowhere. It may have momentary benefits, but then nothing apart from that. So it's not limited to automation testers alone. Manual testers, developers, and everybody else needs to be able to use it. We should have ways to, sorry about that, to make it flexible, adaptable, scalable, reusable, and simple. So if we are having a futuristic view, these are the abilities that the automation framework must have. Otherwise, we are lacking behind in one or the other field. So these are the underlying design principles that we have to consider. There's not much scope for assumption because, like, again, it's an in sprint thing nowadays. It's everything is agile. It's not waterfall. Like whatever you're creating at the beginning may turn out to be something else in the end. So you have to think in a very incremental fashion. Think big, but work small. Think future, but focus on the present. So that way we can come up with a solution which can fit the futuristic requirements as well. Now, to get the maximum ROI on test automation, okay, what do we have to do? We have to narrow down the scope of test automation. We have to select the right automation tool. Again, there are a lot of assumption that I'm having. Like, again, many people, you have to do your groundwork basically before jumping onto any of these activities. You have to choose appropriate framework, and then you have to have strict scripting standards. I've seen where the framework looked okay, but then the scripting standards were so bad that the maintenance cost just shot up. So we can't do away with these coding standards, scripting standards, and we have to measure the matrices. Now, what matrices? So we can calculate the number of defects that we have found. Now, when I say that, it need not be automation always finding the defects. If I have automated few scenarios, manual scenarios, and then manual tester is getting that extra time to do other manual tests, and they are able to find the defects, I would still give a bit of credit to automated testing, because automation testing is an enabler which is taking the load off the domain experts so that they can do more interesting work, more productive work. So we are watching their back basically. And the time required for automated testing for each cycle, and then how much time are we cutting down for the release. And there's something called customer satisfaction index, and then productivity improvements. So these are the few matrices that we can take into consideration. Now, coming to the previous ones were more from a planning point of view, coming to the implementation point of view. So ensure that there's a maximum code reusability, write the code in such a way that it's reusable, and the maintenance cost should be the least. And then there should be provision for non-technical business users to interact with the framework. Now, this is what I was talking about, utilization. It shouldn't be, only automation testers, baby. Like, other people should be able to handle it. And then from a development point of view, ensure that you're following good coding standards, you are creating good reusable libraries, you having certain common libraries, creating them and sharing across the teams, across the projects, and then taking care of the most repetitive works. And then ensure that the test data is externalized. When I say externalize, avoid embedding test data within the scripts. Still, somehow that seems to be the case in many of the companies. Have robust error handling mechanism, logging mechanism, and then reporting mechanism. Okay. And apart from that, we need to have integration with other tools, especially the test management tool, If you're using Jira, ensure that it can be integrated to Jira. If you're populating any results, ensure that it's populated in, say, Jira Ticket or Zephyr or whatever other test management tool that you're using. And then again, I'm emphasizing on this fact that ensure your code, your framework is scalable, traceable, maintainable, and reusable. Only then you will get good ROI. Okay, it may not be in the first execution cycle, but then eventually, when we say scalable, maintainable, and reusable, these are the, and traceable, it's all with an eye in the future. Otherwise, I can say it's immediate problem solver. But in scalable, I'm assuming that the problem will become bigger. So should the solution be. Traceable, like tomorrow things may get bigger. It will be hard for finding where exactly things are. Maintainable, because if things become bigger, changes will happen for sure. So are we making the changes with the least possible effort? Is it reusable in future for future problem statements? Now, post implementation, you can think about certain execution aspects of test automation. So, can we do it overnight execution? It's a great value addition. It may not be directly monetary, but then, when everybody is sleeping, you can trigger this execution, unmanned remote execution, so that there's some benefit out of it. Early morning, you come back, you look at the results, you say, okay, this is where it has failed. Let's focus on this area. So see, we are trying to move away from the definition of ROI earlier. Now it's much more bigger. Can we do parallel execution? And then there's a scope for exploratory testing for manual testers if they want to. And then if you can increase the utilization so that the BAs, the developers, the testers can utilize the automation framework. And then it's also helpful in upskilling our resources in certain areas. And then most of the resources can focus on other interesting areas once all the mundane tasks are automated. Now, just a bit of reiterating the whole thing with a different visualization. So to ensure good test automation ROI, you stick to the basics, create a good automation framework, design it very well with all the futuristic requirements in mind, with the big picture in mind, pick the right tool, and pick the right automation candidates. And then ensure, regarding the usage, the whole team is able to use it, the execution is fast enough, the maintenance is minimal, there's maximum visibility, like what tasks are you doing, how exactly is the progress going on, and trace it back to each of the manual test case or the requirement for that matter. Ensure that it's integrated with all the necessary applications out there, be it test management tool, defect management tool, or requirement management tool, or any cloud-based solution that is out there, so that reporting tool, so that ensure that you are integrated with those solutions, so that there's no manual switch required. And also focus on the intra-team scenarios where you have to do the integration testing. Fine, you have done your amazing big picture automation design for your own product, but then if it goes to integration testing, things can break. So you have to think about the stubs, and then you have to think about how exactly mock servers and stuff like that, how exactly they can take care of all the integration testing scenarios. Ensure the stakeholders are informed, the decision makers are informed, and then there's a clear visibility within how exactly the solution looks like and how exactly it is going to benefit the stakeholders and decision makers. So each of these key points are very critical, and then they serve their purpose sooner or later. Now, I would like to also emphasize on certain visibility and traceability factors, which is ensure there is sufficient number of GR tickets, okay, especially with regards to the design, development, execution, and maintenance and training tasks. Okay, so there should be a separate Jira ticket for each of these to create visibility in that. There can be documentation as well. How exactly are you estimating ROI? Again, how exactly are you calculating ROI can be dependent on various different factors. Create your design document, create your execution guides, and last but not the least, ensure there's time code. If you're clocking time against any of these activities, there are enough time codes for each of these activities, because eventually the top management looks at the money that they have spent. And then if I have just one, if I'm clocking my time against a particular Jira ticket, which is like an umbrella ticket, which is not really, how do I say, which is not very clear what exactly it has a lot of other subtasks within it, then the top management sees that one particular activity as waste of time. So we have to break down each of these tasks and have to have separate time codes for each of those. Otherwise, the visibility is not there. And each of the Jira tickets up there needs to have traceability back to the requirement, actually. Yeah. So these are few activities which are not directly related to implementation from at code level, but then these are the activities that surround the automation framework, and they're quite critical, actually. Now think about automation ROI based on purpose, not just money. What's the purpose that we are trying to serve using test automation? ROI based on the quality. Have I increased the quality matrices? Have I increased the speed of execution? Have I increased the productivity of the team? Have I saved certain budget? Have I averted certain risk? So the formula out there is like for risk based or risk reduction ROI. So these are some things which, like, not an automation tester, but then somebody like a test lead or a delivery lead or a delivery manager can look into. So they can come up with these matrices and calculate the ROI accordingly. So the point I'm trying to make is our solution can serve much more bigger purpose and then can return much more bigger ROI than what it looks on the paper. Now, who should be concerned with test automation ROI? So this is a typical org structure, right? So at the top we have CTOs, below that we have delivery managers, then we have a parallel testing practice team, then we have project managers, test lead, delivery leads, and we have manual testers, automation testers, and developers reporting accordingly. So whose baby is this? Whose baby is test automation ROI? Who should really care for test automation ROI? So anybody like would like to put a comment in the chat, like who's taking care of test automation ROI in your field? Please feel free to put it, because the way I see it is nobody cares. I mean, that's a very sad. I do care. I personally do care. I've tried to make the noise with the leads, with the managers, but then they are like, no, let the show must just go on. Just don't bother about the money or the time or the effort for that matter. But I personally feel like each and every one of these guys need to be consulted, discussed, and then we need to come up with um, a particular matrix like which we all agree upon. Yeah, there can be few deviations here and there, but then everybody needs to be consulted. Everybody needs to have their say to ensure that we get good return on investment. Now, there can be certain limitations with regards to this. So it can be the team composition, like, okay, fine, I want to increase my test automation ROI. I want to get good returns on the investment. But then the team lacks the skills. We don't have enough team members. We don't have enough dedicated resources. There can be design issues. The design is flawed. The application can be outdated. It's not compatible. It's not feasible to automate extensively. We are lacking visibility. There's lack of traceability. There's lack of long-term plan. There is lack of big picture in this. The org structure, like the structure that I showed there, say if nobody cares for your return on investment, then it's gone for a toss. Each individual will go do their stuff, come back. Nobody will care. The project can close down. And then the team structure, like how the team is looking like. Integration, like how exactly the systems are integrated with each other. What are the processes? What are the testing process? What is the development process? What are the best practice that have been in place? So if we are not taking into these consideration, then each one can be potential flaw, and then there's a lot of money that can be drained out due to these. Now, this is what I'm trying to highlight. So each of those steps can potentially lead to blockages. So just to highlight, there can be few legacy frameworks. Okay, they have been there in the organization. Organization doesn't want to move away from it, so it's just there. Okay, and then the products are there, the processes are there. Nobody knows why. We are just blindly following it. And then this, what does it do? It clogs the pipeline, the project pipeline, or whatever pipeline you want to call it. So it just keeps on clogging over a period of time, and then the test automation development itself becomes repetitive. How boring is that? And I thought the automation testers make sure that the repetitive tests are automated by making it much more interesting. But then if the automation development itself becomes repetitive, you're doing the same step again and again, it's such a boring thing, right? So somewhere that step itself needs to be automated, isn't it? And the cost of moving away from old frameworks or the processes, the company doesn't want to pay. Okay, they don't want to pay moving away. They say the show is going fine, we don't want to spend extra money on these new frameworks or new processes. There can be error in estimations, which can totally run berserk. And then the test can be flaky, the process can be glitchy, the hierarchy may not care, it may have its own problem. So these are the few tangible ones. And then there is intangibles where there's a clear inertia. Inertia is in like they don't want to do anything new. They just want to stick to whatever they are doing. Like this is a human nature, right? Like once you get used to something, no matter how boring it is, people just go with the flow until the pipeline bursts, basically. And then there can be politics, why somebody doesn't want to, invest in these new things. There can be other factors as well. So all these eventually lead to accumulation of certain risk. Okay, I see these as potential risks. And then if we are sticking to any of these, then eventually the pipeline will burst. And then we have to do the patchwork. It's not the right way to do it. I'm sure, like even in physical world, we don't like to do such things. But then this is how the world works, right? So we had looked at these graphs earlier, which are very typical graphs. Maybe I can say a bit pessimistic graphs. But then I would like to say how the ideal graphs would look like. And then trust me, these are some things that I have worked with. So these are not very ideal graphs. It is a very tangible, reachable solution. That is over a period of time. Yes, initially the test automation effort will be high, but then eventually the effort will go down. I can give you an example of one of the organizations where I created this framework. For the first 5 products that I tested, I had to develop and code. But then from 6th to 10th, I didn't have to write a single line of code. All I had to do was, pass certain test data and execute. That's it. And then that eventually, converts into the next graph. The coverage can keep on increasing. So like I have cut down my development cost, but then I can focus on the coverage. So because of that, my coverage graph shoots up and my development cost goes down over a period of time. The maintenance cost goes down. The learning curve is small. This is based on a good design. And good design also leads to, as the coverage increases, it's not that the execution time increases, but then it increases in a very small slope, basically. So if all the above points that I have specified earlier are taken into consideration, this is how the graphs will look like. And then I have seen them, okay? So you can take my word for that. Now, let's look at the problem statement in a different way. So how about ROI based on cost of defect in production? Now, the first formula that we saw was very simple, where we are versing our test automation effort to manual testing effort. But then think this way. If I have automated a particular manual test case, and the manual testers are able to focus on other testing, and then they are able to find a particular defect. Okay, had this been not the scenario, then the defect would have gone into the production, and how much loss the business would have incurred. Can we see the return on investment that way? Isn't that much more valuable that way? Can we see that the manual testers are able to focus, or other testers are able to focus, or even automation testers are able to focus on more exploratory testing? Isn't automation testing removing the fatigue and the errors that fatigue can lead to? It can lead to employee retention. It can lead to productive and efficient testing. It can lead to team spirit. It can lead to many more things. So how do we quantify these things? Is there a possible way to quantify these factors, the value addition that a good automation framework is able to add? So that I would call is more of a return on investment. But can we measure these? I can't think of a way to do that at this point of time. So near future. So near future, we'll have machine learning, we'll have more data points, we'll get more results and insight. We can create framework which can be self-maintained, and we can gather more statistics. So the previous slide which I was talking about, it's more intangible, but then I'm sure in coming days with the advancement in machine learning, in artificial intelligence and other things, I'm sure we can gather all these numbers and we are able to quantify all the factors that I have listed above. So we need a tighter ecosystem to quantify and track every task. We're almost there actually. And we need more statistics and would require more complex formula to calculate the test automation ROI. And sometimes ROI may not be in numbers, but they may be as abstract as what we call happiness quotient. But we should strive to gather numbers and play with them to make this whole process a much more traceable and quantifiable activity. Now, lately I've been looking at much at data sciences, but then the quote up there is quite a disappointing one. Okay, all models are wrong. Okay, these are by popular statisticians. But then thankfully I got a addendum to that. So the modeling in science remains partly, at least in art. Some principles do exist, however, to guide the modeler. The first is that all the models are wrong. Okay, quite disappointing, but some though are better than others, and we can search for the better ones. At the same time, we must recognize the eternal truth is not within our grasp. Okay, so what it means to say is do your best and then leave the rest. So, conclusion, how would I like to conclude this? So, don't worse your test automation to manual testing. See it as an enabler. Test automation is much more complex than most people think. So, it's a full fledged project in itself. So, hence, it needs to be treated like one, even within the project space. It has its own SDLC, STLC. So, we need time codes, we need Jira tickets, likewise. So the cost incurred can be much more than thought of, but so would be the benefits. So what is test automation ROI all about? So even if we have all the Jira tickets, we have all the time codes for the task, everything is quantified. Where is the return on investment? So the way I see it is investing in test automation is like planting a tree. You're doing the right thing. If done diligently, you will save a lot of money and reap other benefits too. And if not, the returns may not be monetary, but would be through other means. You getting my point? And as long as we are striving to do the right thing, okay, as long as we are striving to do the right thing, that in itself is the return on our effort, which is the real investment. So stick to the basics is what's my giveaway for you guys. So if you're using automation, you may be saving money, you may be making money, you may be saving time, you may be making increasing the quality, you may be increasing the skill levels, improving the resources that you have, you may be increasing the knowledge. So eventually you are adding value to your organization. So how much we may be able to quantify it to some extent, but then rest, it's all about adding the value within the organization. Thank you. And with that, I'm open for questions. So anybody would like to ask any questions, please shout out. Anyone? No, please unmute yourself and then you can ask the question.
Do you think value might be a better word than ROI?
Yes, but then people ask about ROI. The top managers look for ROI. I think somebody, is it Senthil? I think he has put a point there. Yeah. So people do ask for ROI, but then yes, it does add value. But then how do we calculate ROI? So we have certain formula out there. The testing people have been using those numbers to calculate that. But then beyond that, I would like to say the formula needs to be much more complicated. And then the way we put it through is going to be much more deeper than in what we use in current sense. Yeah. So anyone else?
Vikas, I don't have any question, but I can tell from the presentation I learned so much when you addressed, the points on limitations as well as the other points which enables on the test automation, not just, whatever you know as a language and you go and do automation. That's not the right way. So putting everything in a clear picture, that really gives a good understanding for me.
Thanks, Anthony. So as I'm looking at the comments, so if you are okay, please type a question in the chat window. So Swagat, I see you have said something like 90% it's utilized every release. I didn't get your point there. Swagat?
I think it was your earlier question because you asked us, how much currently you guys are utilizing in automation space, and that was a response, I guess, from Swagat.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then Kapil is asking, are you referring to regressions suite here? I mean, again, like I'll not, narrow down it to just regression suite. It can be progression as well. We can say, I did say type of testing and level of testing. So everything comes into picture here. It can be regression, progression, or it can be performance testing also. So I'm not leaving out performance testing as something separate. It is also, in a way, it's in a way automated testing only. So even for that matter, we had to take into consideration everything, whatever I spoke about today. So Santosh, you had to say automation testing engineer need to discuss with the sprint team when adding the story. Yes. I understand the point that what you're trying to say, but again, most of those numbers are, I think, experience based. If I'm right, if you could correct me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
generally in our sprint catch-ups, I discuss with the team members there because every story don't need to have automation test for that. So
Mhm.
I should always see is it really worth ROI for that.
Yeah, exactly. So again, that brings me back to the same point, like how exactly are we quantifying that? How exactly are we quantifying that? So that itself is a big question. So we are currently in a particular system where everything can be quantified. So we have everything cloud-based systems. We can track everything. All we need is more data points, and that data points needs to be quantified. And then I have been looking at the machine learning aspect of things, and probably if we can quantify each of these activities and then come up with a particular solution, how exactly we can trace these activities and how exactly we can say, okay, we gave estimate of say 10 hours for a particular scenario, but we spent 8 hours. So how exactly are we going to track it? So we already have all the systems in the cloud. There's good amount of machine learning algorithms out there. So it's all about just integrating the two so that we get the right matrices to calculate the real return on investment. Not only, actually, I think I can think of adding sentiment analysis also to this. So if somebody is happy because something is automated and the other guy can or girl can focus on some other nice activities, that also needs to be taken into consideration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then anything else? Okay, so John has reiterated me. Yes, I have put that all models are wrong, but some are useful as a reference. So that was quite interesting. So while I was going through this whole topic, this is very deep actually. This is very, very, very deep. And I hope that the way I have ended it is on very philosophical levels. So these are a few of the references that I have taken, and yeah. So thank you for spending time. So If you have any other comments or questions, please let me know. Happy to discuss with you. Thanks, Aditi, for saying you found it useful. Thanks for that. So anybody, anything positive, negative comments, or if you have anything to share that you think I could have added, or your organization is doing, which needs to be part of other teams as well, best practices. Okay, so I'm assuming everybody's saying good session, good session. So I'm assuming you agree to my viewpoint to a certain extent, I would say. So we are trying our best. Everybody is trying their best to add value into the work that they are doing. It may be quantifiable. Some good aspects may not be visible, but then having said that, the good aspects may be abstract. It may not be quantifiable all the time, but then eventually we are in a ecosystem where things are getting quantified. Even the sentiments are getting quantified, which is good. So maybe it's not too long ago, maybe post Corona, there'll be much more data sciences. There's much more machine learning. There's much more AI coming up. So in that direction, maybe we'll see the whole formula for return on investment will change. Yeah.
Hey, Vikas, you asked us the question. Maybe I missed it. From your previous experience, where this question comes to you, like within the organization chart you showed us, like return on investment.
Yeah. No, sorry, I didn't get your questions until. Sorry.
You asked the question to us, like from our experience, where where the ROI should come from.
Yeah.
In your experience in the recent past, or a couple of places where you work, where that originates, like the question being asked, what is my return on investment?
Okay,
Which
good.
level?
See, I mean, when did I do that? As a part of practice team, when I was part of a testing practice team.
Okay. Okay.
I did the ROI calculation, but surprisingly, after that, nobody really cared about that.
Gotcha.
I mean, say that when I'm part of a delivery team, so delivery team somehow doesn't really care about that as best practices, because I have worked in that direction. There was a time when sorry about that. There was a time when there were two teams who were both doing automation testing. Me being an experienced tester, I did create a solution which I thought will give a good return on investment. I'm spending less time than the developers to automate certain functions. It is much more faster in execution. It's much faster to develop, execute, rework, maintain. But then the other team was spending much more time than the developers itself to create a particular test. So any question that was raised to them about the return on investment, how do you justify that? They couldn't justify any of that.
Okay.
So there have been certain situations why I thought this topic is very, very important, and we need to. I'm not saying that everybody needs to stick to this definition of ROI, but see, like, is it really worth it? I'm sure, like, these Corona times are very good times where you are forced to question these things, where you can think about your expenses. Do I really have to spend so much? Because now I'm just thinking, like, I had like 20, 30 pair of clothes. Should I have spent so much money? But so this is something, this is a good time to speculate return on investment on anything for that matter. Is it worth, commuting from here to work all the way through and coming back? The time, effort, and energy that you have spent. So same thing with test automation as well. So if you can come up with smart, sleek, lean, mean solutions, then please go ahead. But if it's a huge, bulky one, then yeah, I'm sure you should have a good reason to justify that.
Gotcha. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so as you said, yeah, it's a question to be asked by ourselves as part of automation. Yes, absolutely right. Cool. Cool. Thank you all. Thanks for taking your time off. And then those who are celebrating Ganesh festival today, wish you happy Ganesha festival. And then he's said to be remover of all the obstacles. So I'm sure the world will come out of all the health issues that we are going through currently. Thank you. Thank you. So see you in the next meetup. I think it's there on the next Thursday. That's a good one as well. Cheers. Take care. Bye. Thanks, Aditi. Thank you.